How's it going, everyone? I hope you all are having a wonderful day. In the last video, we vaguely and briefly went over the premise of Bleach Can't Fear Your Own World, and as promised, this video we will be discussing the events of the story with no filters. For those of you who don't want spoilers and just want to know more about the story and see if it's up your alley, then check out the previous video. I'll link it in the description down below. I'm also planning on making an updated theory video using some of the new information we learned from this light novel, so you guys can look forward to that. With all that out of the way, let's get right into it. So for starters, let's focus on the first chapter, or the prologue. It takes place after the 1,000-year blood war was over and a new Ryo was enshrined after Yuha absorbed the previous one into himself. We see the High Priest of Squad Zero, Ichibe Hyosube, and the Captain General, Shunsui Kyoraku, talking about the events that transpired, as well as how they avoided the worst case scenario where Ichigo would have been forced to become the Soul King. Now, I don't remember if it was mentioned in the main series, but this conversation goes back to what Kyoraku told Ichigo's friends when he gave them the soul tickets. The reason Ichigo wouldn't be able to leave the Soul Society anymore wasn't because of his spiritual pressure being too strong for him to exist in the world of the living. That is just what Kyoraku made it seem like in the manga. In actuality, Ichigo would have become the Ryo in order to protect the order and balance of the world, and as a result be unable to leave the Soul Palace. That was the worst possible situation that Kyoraku was preparing for. Good news is Ichigo won, and a new Soul King was enshrined after Yuha absorbed the previous one. We learn the identity of the Soul King later, but I don't want to be ambiguous about it, and this is a spoiler-filled discussion, so I'm just going to tell you guys this. Now, I will be revealing information that we learn later in the series as I go through the story, so if you think the beginning of the video will only cover the first volume, you are wrong. I will be spoiling stuff from volume 3 despite still discussing the events from volume 1. You have been warned. So we learned that the new Ryo is in fact Yuha himself. After Ichigo beat him, he was stripped of his flesh and enshrined in the Soul King Palace to preserve the world as it was. Now you may be wondering, how does this work? How is Yuha, a Quincy, able to be the Ryo or the Soul King? Do you guys remember Pernita, the Stern Rider C? He was a giant hand and claimed to be the left hand of the Ryo, as well as a Quincy. Yeah, so the Ryo was in fact a Quincy and a Soul Reaper, and possibly even a Fullbringer. He was also Yuha's father, and I think we learned that in the main series, but I don't remember that part. Either way, I will go into more details about him when I discuss the formation of the Soul Society. For now, let's move on to what happened next in the story. We go back in time to a point before Kaname Tosen became a Soul Reaper. He was outside of Central 46 screaming for a more severe punishment for the man who killed his friend Kakyo. So we actually learned the name of his cherished friend. We also learned a little more about her personality and ideals. Like, we learned that despite being murdered, she didn't hate or resent her husband. She merely pitied him and was sorry that she couldn't show him the stars. We learned this stuff later on in the story, but I probably wasn't going to go over that scene in detail, so I figured it would be best to discuss it now. Anyways, the guards were about to strike him, but an unnamed Soul Reaper stopped them. This unnamed Soul Reaper started talking to Tosen and informs him that the man who killed his friend is a member of the Tsunayashido's clan's branch family. This man began talking about how the 4 great noble clans would always make these type of situations just disappear and act like it never happened to save face. But since the Soul Reaper was a part of the branch family, they merely gave him a slap on the wrist and placed him under house arrest. Tosen was infuriated by the corruption within the Soul Society. The unnamed Soul Reaper also sounded frustrated when he spoke to Tosen and asked him if he wanted revenge for the death of his friend. Tosen knew that trying to get revenge would go against Kakyo's wishes, so he steeled his resolve and chose to ignore his hatred. The unnamed Soul Reaper accepted his decision and was about to leave. Then Tosen realized he never asked him for his name. The whole time I was reading this, I thought he was speaking to Aizen, and this is how he recruited him to join his cause. Boy, was I off the mark. The man responded by saying his name is Tokinada Tsunayashido. Tosen was in utter disbelief, because that is the name of the man who killed Kakyo. Tokinada started praising Tosen for forgiving him for killing his own wife, Tosen's most cherished friend. Tokinada was worried about a rat from the slums with nothing to lose coming for his life. If it was someone more important, they would have been more hesitant about confronting him, because they would have had a lot at stake and wouldn't have done anything reckless. Tosen then realized that the anger in his voice he had heard earlier wasn't directed at the corruption of the Soul Society, but at Tosen himself. Tokinada was testing him to see if Tosen would become his enemy, and was pleased to hear Tosen was going to honor his late wife by forgiving his crime. Then Tosen just snapped and tried to attack Tokinada, but was easily overpowered. Then Tokinada called the guards and watched as Tosen struggled to hold back his rage. Then Tokinada awoke from his dream with a big sadistic smile on his face. Here we saw Tokinada lavishing in the anguish of Tosen, and what makes it worse is that he was pleased Tosen hadn't asked his name when they first met. The reason being that Tokinada had no intention of hiding his identity. He would have told him without hesitation, which would not have netted the same results as him leading him on like he did. He enjoyed Tosen's reaction so much so that he would even dream about it. And when he woke up, he was surrounded by the corpses of assassins who were defeated by his personal attendant Hikone Ubuginu, a mysterious child with an unknown gender. Seriously, Ryogo the author made it very clear that he had no intention of identifying Hikone by referring to it as they or them for the whole series. As I was saying, Tokinada was sleeping in the Tsunaya Shido's meeting room and he was surrounded by the corpses of his relatives, including the former head of the clan. One of the assassins was still barely alive, and Tokinada decided to walk up to him and tell him that he was the one who hired them to try and kill him. Tokinada knew that either him or Hikone could easily fend them off, and he told the assassin he hired them so he can pin the murder of his family on them and then kill them to ascend to the head of the clan. He told them this just to torture him in his final moments. This is the introduction of the main antagonist of the series, or arc as I like to see it. He enjoys tormenting other people so much so that he confronted Tosen when he was distraught and grieving over the death of Kakyo, and also informed an assassin that he hired them to come and kill him. Hiring the assassins was a part of his plan to gain control of the Tsunaya Shido clan, but he didn't need to tell the assassin that. He did it just because he's a sadistic bastard who enjoys psychologically tormenting people, and he just took control of the most powerful clan in the Soul Society. I'll get into his motives later on in the video, so for now just know that he's a sociopath who loves manipulating and hurting people. Did I forget to mention he's incredibly intelligent? Now let's get into the protagonist, Shuhei Hisagi. We see Hisagi working at the Sedate Bulletin, the newspaper he's the editor-in-chief of, and I kid you not, this is how the chapter begins. Shuhei Hisagi was a man of many hats. No, seriously, the second chapter begins with that. Now after I read this, I sat there for like a solid minute and I was like, he probably has a bunch of fedoras. And I just started picturing Hisagi in like a fashion show of fedoras and fancy suits that benefit an editor to look. Like maybe some spandex, an overcoat, and well, you know, stuff like that. Okay, now I'm getting off topic. I was just surprised that's how Shuhei was introduced. Well, actually, he was introduced a little earlier when it was showing the captains transporting Aizen back to Mugen after Yuha was defeated. Shuhei was all beaten up, but he still had to confront Aizen about why he not only killed Tosen, but destroyed his Konpaku or his soul. Aizen didn't directly state the reason, but he pretty much told Hisagi that he wouldn't understand because he never understood Tosen. This scene causes Hisagi to start questioning what Tosen had been teaching him the whole time he was working under him as a lieutenant, and leads into Hisagi's development later in the series, so I will go more into that when I reach that point. Fast forward 6 months later, and we reach the part I mentioned earlier with the hats. We also learn Hisagi collects motorcycles and guitars that are modified to be able to move to the Soul Society by Kisuke Urohara, which caused Hisagi to rack up a massive debt to him, and that's where most of Hisagi's check goes to. So now we know that Hisagi is a passionate collector, and Kisuke takes full advantage of that. He recreates valuable guitars and cons Hisagi into buying it. Like, Hisagi is supposed to be this disciplined Soul Reaper, but he succumbs to temptation very easily. Funnily enough, a lot of the other Soul Reapers believe that him and Renji are the two Soul Reapers who would be easily seduced by a beautiful woman even if she was the enemy. Which is like, how little do they think of Hisagi and Renji? They are both highly trusted lieutenants. But if there's a fine-ass woman on the battlefield, then it's like, nope, they're screwed. They'll get sprung and switch sides. Okay, maybe not switch sides, but they won't attack with the intent to kill. Okay, enough joking around, let's get back to the story. It was around this time Hisagi was working on reopening the bulletin, with the first issue being about the events that just transpired. At the same time, Tokinada was officially recognized as the next head of the Tsunaya Shido clan, and sent a request to Shuhei to print a full article about him. He probably did this to torment Hisagi, and it somewhat worked. Hisagi was pissed, but he kept a level head and decided to do some research to gain information about Tokinada to write a genuine article despite him not wanting to. Remember, Hisagi values himself as a true journalist, so he will print an honest article. It also doesn't hurt that the fact that Tokinada is covering the cost of printing the article. Now, Shuhei needed to interview people who were familiar with the 4 great noble clans, and who better than the 5th noble clan who was ostracized from nobility and banished to the Rokungai, or the slums as I put it earlier. So Shuhei went to speak with Kukaku Shiba, whose family was kicked out of nobility when their most prominent member, Kaien Shiba, passed away. Shuhei decided to question her about Tokinada. Unfortunately, Kukaku didn't have a lot of info, other than the fact that Tokinada has always had a twisted personality. Hey everyone, editor's note here, I mixed up some of the parts. During his first interview with Kukaku, Shuhei had yet to receive Tokinada's request, so he was interviewing her for her role in sending Ichigo to the Soul Palace, and she had no other information other than the fact that she shot him up there. Sorry for the mix-up, and now back to the video. After finishing his interview, Shuhei was leaving, and there he met Ginjo, Tsukishima, and Giriku, who were admiring his bike while trying to figure out how did a motorcycle end up in the Soul Society. Apparently, all 3 of them have been staying with the Shibas. Shuhei takes this opportunity to confront Ginjo about what happened to make him hate Soul Reapers. Shuhei then learns that Captain Ukitake had bugged Ginjo's Soul Reaper badge, which caused one of Ginjo's friends to be killed when they were ambushed by Soul Reapers. Since then, Ginjo has despised all Soul Reapers. Shuhei questioned why he never confronted Ukitake about it and heard his side. Ginjo felt that would be a waste of time since it looked like Ukitake tried to have him killed. Even if it wasn't Ukitake's doing and someone else was just using him, the breach of trust had been made. Ginjo was unable to see Ukitake as an ally anymore. Shuhei then decided to shelve the rest of this interview for another time and resumed his information gathering for his article on the war. But he didn't completely drop the idea of investigating what happened between Ukitake and Ginjo. Meanwhile, in the human world, there is this new fate that has been expanding its influence. It's headed by a woman named Ora Michibane. The name of her religion is Execution, and the religion revolves around the Soul Society. So she knows about the existence of Soul Reapers and the cycle of life and death, and she's been spreading the word around growing her new religion. Now, the name Execution may seem familiar to most of you, because that was the name of Ginjo's Fullbringer group. This attracted the attention of Yukio, a former member of Execution. After meeting with Ora, he decided to support her religion. Now, this fate grew so prominent that the people who passed away and awoke in the Soul Society already knew where they were, and they began preaching about execution and the coming of a new king. Ginjo just so happened to be walking by these new arrivals when he heard them use the name Execution, so he decided to investigate it, and unfortunately, he didn't get any relevant information out of it. Around the same time, we see what's happening in Hueco Mundo. The remnants of the Quincy army that weren't affected by Yuha's Oswalin, which absorbed the powers of his subordinates and killed them off, are now being hunted down and killed by the Arrancars Rudobon, Menoli, and Lolly. The three of them have been having an easy go at it, especially since Rudobon had been training and getting stronger since Aizen was no longer around to lead them. They were making quick work of the Quincies until they ran into the Stern Ridders Giselle, Lil Toto, and the zombified Bambietta. Yeah, they were still alive. They had survived because Hashwalt, the Stern Ritter B, saw the future when Yuha took his final slumber and informed his subordinates to rescue as many Quincies as they can. He possibly did this because he saw a future where both him and Yuha were killed, so he decided to save as many Quincies as he could to prevent them from going extinct. Back to the battle, Giselle, or Gigi for short, decided to send out Bambietta, and Rudobon was no match for her. Then Grimjow, along with Neliel and Hallibel, joined the fight after sensing a powerful Quincy. Shortly thereafter, another contestant joined the fray. A gargantua opened between both parties, and a small child walked out of it. Now, this child had a weird spiritual pressure. It was a mixture of Soul Reaper, Quincy, and hollow spiritual pressure similarly to Ichigo's. This child identified itself as Hikone, the new king of Hueco Mundo. After hearing this, Grimchow was infuriated, and hearing some child proclaim that they're the new king when it was their first time setting foot in Hueco Mundo really pissed them off. Now, Hikone didn't intend to just act like the king the moment they walked in, and began fighting both the Quincies and Arrancars at the same time. While this battle was going on, Hisagi was running around through all of the barracks trying to gather any sort of information on Tokinata. He ended up seeking a meeting with a member of the Seijin Council who worked for Central 46 and the nobility. The person he was waiting for was Sanosuke Yamada, a former lieutenant of Squad 4 and the older brother of Hanatoto Yamada. As they were waiting for him, a gargantua opened in the middle of the courtyard and a child covered in blood and wounds walked out of it. The moment Hanatoto saw them, he quickly rushed over there to heal them. He literally paid no mind to the fact that this child just walked out of a gargantua, which is used by hollows. Now, as you would have probably have guessed, this child was Hikone, and they were beaten by their Arrancars and Quincies. Hikone was extremely depressed, not just because of the loss, but because they could not fulfill Tokinata's order. This caused Hikone to lose the will to live and even asked Hanatoto to stop healing them. After hearing this, Hisagi was annoyed, not only because this child worked for Tokinata, but because they had said that they wanted to die. He managed to convince Hikone to live by stating that they can't be useful to Tokinata if they're dead. That was when Sanosuke showed up and told them that Hikone has a special body, so he will need to take over her treatment. As Hikone was walking away, they thanked both Hanatoto and Hisagi for helping them, and stated, "I won't forget your kindness when I become king." This struck Hisagi as being very odd because of the existence of the Reo or the Soul King. Hisagi may not have been aware of what the Soul King was, but he was sure it's not something just anyone can claim to become. And hearing Hikone, who's Tokinata's attendant with an unusual spiritual pressure, state that they will become the king made Hisagi become even more wary of Tokinata. Like, what is he planning to do to this kid and how will they become the Soul King? Sanosuke scolded Hikone for telling them that when they're not allowed to talk about it. So now we have an idea of what Tokinata is planning, with Hikone stating Tokinata wants to make them the king, and the execution fate talking about a new king rising from within the Soul Society. Again, Hisagi doesn't know what the Soul King is, so he wasn't aware of the significance of Hikone's words. Later that evening, Ginjo and the others were heading back to the Shiba hut after not gaining any information on this new fate, and then they were ambushed by some Arankars. These Arankars were the zombies that Mayuri Kurosuchi brought back to life. You see, Mayuri has set his eyes on some new test subject, and that was now the Fullbringers. He also didn't care that Sunsui, the Captain General, gave them a pardon for their assistance during the Thousand-Year Blood War. Mayuri just wanted to research how Fullbringers work. This battle ended up drawing the attention of Grimmjow, who thought the mixture of spiritual pressure was Hikone, who fled from him and the others earlier. This massive battle caught the attention of a few important people, one being Captain Shinji Hirako, who despite having received a notice of experimentation from the 12th Division didn't trust Mayuri Kurosuchi and went to check it out. The other being Tokinada Tsuneyashiro, who was viewing everything from the visual department security room. You see, the visual department is like a dystopian society-esque surveillance division that would primarily be used by the 12th Division to watch over the Soul Society. However, the department was owned by the nobility and can dictate how it's used, which Mayuri obviously would not have been a fan of. So he created the surveillance bugs we see in the Bleach one-shot. Now, when Tokinada saw how intense things were getting, he decided to send in Hikone. When he was speaking with Hikone, we heard a second voice, which was apparently coming from their Zanpakuto. We later learned that Hikone's Zanpakuto, Iko Miki Domoe, which I'm just going to shorten to Iko to make things easier for me. Okay, this is a very long word that's also very hard to pronounce. I mean, look at it. Do you think this word will be easy to consistently pronounce? So I'm just going with Iko from now on. So Iko is a Zanpakuto with its own will. We later learned that the reason it can speak and think for itself is that Iko used to be a hollow back before the worlds were separated. So Hueco Mundo was connected to the human world, and Iko would go around devouring humans until Squad Zero sealed it into a Zanpakuto. That Zanpakuto was supposed to be sealed away within the Soul King's palace, but disappeared during Yuha's invasion. Now it has ended up in the hands of Hikone. After Hikone joined the fray, Tokinada receives a visit from Soifone and the Stealth Force. They claim to be there to escort Tokinada into protective custody to protect him from assassins. However, Tokinada was aware that this was Shunsui Koraku's doing. You see, the Captain General is fully aware of Tokinada's twisted personality, because him and Ukitake were close friends with him back in the academy, and it was Shunsui who caught Tokinada after he killed his own wife and friend. So the moment Tokinada became the head of the Tsuneyashiro clan, Shunsui has been keeping his one good eye on him at all times, and he figured it would be best to try and take Tokinada in, to try and stop whatever he was planning. However, Tokinada anticipated this, and had assassins attack him at the same time, granting him the opportunity to escape in the ensuing chaos. However, this attempt was not for nothing, because during the ensuing battle, Tokinada used his Zanpakuto's ability. And now Shunsui knows Tokinada's Zanpakuto's power. I know what you guys are thinking. Wouldn't Shunsui have known his Zanpakuto ability since they were friends back at the academy? Well, you see, Tokinada lost his original Zanpakuto when he killed his wife. But when he became the head of the Tsuneyashiro clan, he gained the family's Zanpakuto. So like Nanao's Zanpakuto, Tokinada was wielding a Zanpakuto that can be passed on to someone else. Although in Tokinada's case, he stole it from the previous head, but still. So now we know his Zanpakuto has the ability to reflect other Zanpakuto abilities back to the user. Granted, it was limited to Kido-based abilities, not physical or psychological like Kenpachi's no Zadashi or Aizen's Kyoka Sogetsu. With this information, Shunsui has an idea of Tokinada's ability and had to strategize around it. Back to the main fight, Hikone had released Iko's Shikai form, and a giant Adjutus hollow appeared on the battlefield. An Adjutus, for those of you who don't know, is the form between a Gillian and a Vastal Lordis. However, this Adjutus was the size of a Gillian, which makes it massive, and it had the ability to produce smaller hollows to fight alongside it. This fight was so massive, it even drew in the Quincy's Lily and Gigi. They showed up primarily to find their comrades Candace Catnip and Menace McAllen, who were taken by Mayuri Kurosuchi and brought back to life to be a part of his corpse unit. Also, I just realized they were charged with kidnapping the Fullbringers, not the Arankars. The Arankars didn't join in until Grimmjow showed up, and that was primarily Luffy and Tenor trying to get revenge on Grimmjow, who killed him to reclaim his 6th position. After some time, Hikone received word from Tokinada to withdraw to their hideout. After Hikone made her grand exit via teleportation, Shunsui had made his move to gather everyone who had fought against Hikone and form an alliance to stop them from replacing the Soul King and reshaping the world, which would cause a massive amount of chaos and destruction, leading to an unimaginable number of fatalities. Around the same time, Misaki was in the human world interviewing Kisuke Urahara about his part during the Soul King Protection War, which is what the war with the Quincy's is being called. During the interview, they are attacked by Yukio and Ora, who came to recruit Urahara to join their cause. When Kisuke refused, they tried to take him by force. Of course, Shuhei tried to help, but Ora had a very unique ability. You see, she was a Fullbringer without any attachments. She had loved her father and his cooking, but he disappeared while looking for a way to get rid of their abilities, which resulted with Ora being trapped in a glass case, which was meant to keep her spiritual pressure from attracting hollows, but was now a cage imprisoning her. She was dying from starvation. So she honed the little knowledge of reishi manipulation her father taught her to turn the glass into sand and escape. Unfortunately, the first thing she found to eat had grown old and moldy, ruining her connection to food. So she grew up with no connections while honing her ability to manipulate reishi. Her skills were so advanced that she could turn her body into mist and strike from out of nowhere. In the end, Hisagi and Urahara were no match for Aura and Yukio's abilities, especially since Aura is able to transfer some of her Ryatsu into others, granting them abilities similar to hers. Or if they already have a Fullbring, she can enhance it. So she could turn normal people into Fullbringers, albeit inexperienced ones, while also being able to improve the abilities of fellow Fullbringers like Yukio, for example. This combination is what allowed them to successfully kidnap Urahara. Now this hurt Hisagi bad, because he felt like he was useless during that fight. His insecurities grew even more, but he didn't let that discourage him. He began looking for a way to rescue Urahara. He then runs into Tessai Tsukabishi, who helped Hisagi figure out what Aura's goal is, and where she most likely fled to. Apparently, Kisuke had some suspicions about what Tokinara and the Tsunayashiro clan were up to. You see, the Tsunayashiro clan have also been attempting to make a Hogyuku like Kisuke and Aizen. In order for them to gather as much material for the Hogyuku as quickly as possible, they forced Ukitake to place a surveillance device in Ginjo's Soul Reaper badge. They then waited for an opening to ambush Ginjo, which resulted with the death of one of his friends. Now you may be wondering, what does Ginjo have to do with the Hogyoku? You see, it's not Ginjo specifically, but Fullbringers in general. You see, all Fullbringers have the material to make a Hogyoku. It's this mysterious stuff that allows their body to take in hollow energy and turn it into Fullbring abilities. Because of the Tsunayashiro's clan's actions, Aura's father disappeared, and Tokinara took advantage of this to recruit Aura to his cause. That's when we learned that Aura's father was seeking out Ginjo to help get rid of his and Aura's Fullbring, which resulted in him getting killed by the Tsunayashiro clan, and Ginjo discovering the surveillance device in his badge. Yeah, so Aura is the daughter of Ginjo's friend who was killed by Soul Reapers, and her inability to form attachments is a result of the Tsunayashiro's clan's actions. So why does she join Tokinara? She didn't have a real reason. She just didn't have any reason to decline him. She had no purpose in life, so she just went along with whichever direction the wind took her. She may have joined him on a whim, but she gained a lot of information from it. Like, what is the item that granted Fullbringers their abilities, and is also the main ingredient in creating a Hogyoku? Alright people, so you all are here because you want to learn how to make a Hogyoku. Well, first step is preheating your oven to 300 degrees, then get yourself a Fullbringer or anyone else with a special ingredient within them, and remove it. Now I'm sure you are wondering what that ingredient is. Get ready, cause here it is. It's a fragment of the rail that was scattered around the multiple worlds when his flesh was ripped from his soul and enshrined in the Soul King's palace. Now you take those fragments and mix them in a bowl and bake for 30 minutes, and now you have the ability to transcend the false idol at the top of the palace. Mwahahaha. Excuse me, got a little carried away there. But now we know what gives Fullbringers their abilities. Now, under normal circumstances, if someone were to lose the fragment within them, they either die or, if they're lucky, lose a vast majority of their spiritual pressure. However, there was an exception with Rangiku. She was in possession of the nail, which was stolen by Aizen. She not only lived, but was even able to become a lieutenant afterwards. That doesn't change the fact that a lot of people lost their lives for a Hogyoku to be created. That goes for Aizen and even Kisuke's situation as well. You see, we learn later on that the reason Kisuke created the Hogyoku in the first place was to satisfy his scientific curiosity, a decision that he regretted to this day, because of all the needless sacrifice that took place for its creation. Okay, enough about that. Back to Aura's situation. Tokinara needed someone highly skilled in reishi manipulation to help him create the new Soul King. So we had Aura use a mesh of human Soul Reaper and Quincy Konbakus combined with the brain of the Vision Quincy Gremory Thomax to create Hikone. Now, Aura didn't make Hikone alone. She gave them life, but it was Sanosuke Yamada who preserved it and allowed them to continue living. Aura also used her ability to steal both Iko and the Tsunayashiro clan's sword Kyojin Kyokoko, as well as establish the execution religion. The whole purpose of the religion was to gather a large number of people into Karakura town in order to sacrifice them to make a Mugen. The Mugen is a key that allows passage to the Soul King's palace. Tokinara is trying to get to the Soul King's palace so he can enshrine Hikone there and replace Yuha, who was the current Soul King, who by the way also had his flesh stripped from his soul and his fragments were spread throughout the worlds, which I have a couple theories I want to talk about in my next video, so look forward to that. Anyways, back to the story. Currently, Tokinara, Aura, and Hikone all gathered in a place called the Kyogoku, or the Valley of Screams, which are dimensions of reishi existing within the Garganta. The Garganta is that black void area between the worlds that Ichigo went through to get to Wako Mundo. Now, these pocket dimensions called Kyogokus are difficult to find, but not impossible, and both Mayuri and Kisuke were able to locate the one Tokinara was hiding in. This is important because Kisuke left behind hints for Tessai so he can lead Hisagi to Tokinara's base of operations, while Mayuri was recruiting recruited by Sunsui along with Shinji, the Urankars, Quincy's, and Fullbringers to stop Tokinada's plan. Also, Kenpachi was there along with Ikaku and Yumichika, who were recruited to help fight Ikone and Iko. Now, the reason they all joined together was because the Captain General had promised to pardon the Quincy's for their efforts during the Soul King Protection War. The Urankars were forced to join by Mayuri, who would shock them if they even spoke out of turn. This, of course, excludes the Espada since they aren't his zombie servants. They joined in to make sure Wako Mundo doesn't get caught up in the aftermath. The Fullbringers joined in just because they didn't like what Tokinada was doing, and they wanted to make him pay for using the execution name. Kenpachi was promised to fight against a strong opponent, and Mayuri was just complying with Captain General's orders, so he created a portal and teleported them to the Kyogoku right outside a floating palace that resembled the Soul King's palace. And of course, Tokinada had a system in place to detect if someone came into the Kyogoku and discovered them instantly. He then had Iko send its spawns after them. Kenpachi just tore through them, rushing to the source of the spawns with Ikaku and Yumichika in tow. The others were managing to hold back the horde, but they weren't able to get closer to the palace while fighting. So, Shinji told everyone to run straight to the palace and leave the spawns to him. Sunsui knew immediately that Shinji was going to use his Bankai, which is a unique one. Shinji's Bankai is one that does not discriminate between friend and foe, meaning that it's a massive AoE attack that affects everyone around it, similarly to Rukia's. His Bankai has the ability to alter a person's perception of friend and foe, so when he activates it, people will start attacking their own allies. It is mentioned that he can make people think their enemies are allies, but it's flimsier and can be reverted back to foe pretty easily, while making them think their friends are the enemies has better results, with the entire enemy force wiping itself out. Also, he can't reverse the perception of friend and foe for one group and ignore the other. So if his allies are next to him and he uses Bankai, he can't undo the reversal on them alone. He will have to undo it for the enemy as well. Shinji described his Bankai as the perfect ability to deal with multiple weak opponents, while his Shikai is more useful against a singular strong target. While this was going on, we see Ginjo, Tsukishima, and Gideko as they separated from the main group and ran into both Ora and Yukio. In order to surmise if Yukio had betrayed them or not, Tsukishima used his ability on him and inserted himself into his past. Then out of nowhere, Tsukishima attacked Ginjo and Gideko. At the same time, Sunsui let everyone else go confront Tokinada, who was waiting outside on the balcony of the palace. That is when Sunsui and Tokinada had a little conversation about why Tokinada was trying to recreate the world with a new Soul King. Tokinada had claimed that he wanted to instill a Soul King with a will and can communicate the orders. However, Sunsui was fully aware that that was a lie. He's known Tokinada for a long time and was fully aware of his sick, twisted personality. So he knew that Tokinada wants to reshape the world just to see what will happen. There is no deep meaning behind his actions. He just so happens to have the capability to do it, so he's going to try it and see the results. Tokinada wants to sacrifice thousands of people and send the world into utter chaos just to see how the world will turn out afterward. This isn't like a scientific curiosity or him thinking the world will be better for it. He wants to spread death and chaos while watching people suffer through the world's rebirth. So this kind of bugged me because it showed that Tokinada was literally evil just for the sake of being evil. He doesn't have a sad backstory or a deeper reason for doing the things he's doing. He was born a sadist, and he would have been a sadist even if he was born into a different family. A good environment would not have made Tokinada a better person. He was sick and twisted down to his core. He may have a poorly written motive, but his personality, intelligence, and manipulative nature improved my image of him as an antagonist. It was during this conversation that Sunsui took the opportunity to travel through the overlooming shadow of the palace into Tokinada's shadow and strike him. Unfortunately, Tokinada saw that coming and easily blocked it. While all of this was happening, Tetsai had managed to teleport Hisagi into the floating palace, where he found a giant tube in the center of the room he was in. While investigating the tube, Hikone came in and told him that that's going to be their future throne. Hisagi, fearing what this meant, started questioning Hikone about why they are so loyal to Tokinada. They told him that it was because Tokinada was their whole world. He gave them life, he gave them knowledge, and gave them the ability to become a king. Hisagi could just feel the love and respect in their words, but Hikone was missing something. It's just Hisagi couldn't tell what it was right away. In the end, Hikone left the room before Hisagi could put his thoughts together. And when Hikone left the room, the door disappeared, imprisoning Hisagi in it. He ended up spending some time in there alone with his thoughts and eventually understood what it was that Hikone was lacking. But there was nothing he could do. He wanted to save them, but he was still trapped in the room. That's when he heard Ora call his name. She had shifted herself in the room by turning into mist, so she can confront Hisagi about why he tried to talk Hikone out of supporting Tokinada. Hisagi simply didn't want to kill Hikone if he could talk her out of it instead. He just didn't know what to say to her earlier. But now he knew that Hikone was simply missing a perspective. Her whole world revolved around Tokinada, and only Tokinada. That was too small of a world for them to decide what they wanted to do with their life. He Hisagi wanted to show them that and expand their view on the world so they could decide what they wanted to do with their life, instead of them relying on Tokinata to tell them how to live it. When Aura heard this, she was genuinely surprised and faded out of the room with a smile on her face. When she disappeared, a door appeared in front of Hisagi and he went to go find Hikone. Back on the balcony, Tokinata had called Hikone, who instantly appeared from one of the towers. Hikone was happy to see all of the people whom they had the pleasure of battling. They even stated that they liked them when Tokinata asked what they thought of them. Tokinata then told Hikone that it was important to cherish their relationships and to take care of the people they like, especially as the future king. But they were Tokinata's enemies, so he asked Hikone if they could kill them for him. Without a twitch or a change in expression, Hikone accepted his command and promised to annihilate his enemies. Thus, the battle from the Soul Society had resumed. Only this time, when Hikone released Ikko, the incantation was different. In total, Ikko had 3 release commands. The first, used in Ueko Mundo, being Orbit the Stars, which only released a hollow hand that can attack on its own. Then the next one, that was used in the Soul Society, was Jot or Mark Down Their Funeral, which was the giant form I mentioned earlier. The final incantation was Hatch Out and Be Ruined, which released a smaller hollow than before, but its spiritual pressure was far greater. This form was so much stronger than before that the Arankars, Tyr, Nelial, and Grimjow had to use their resurrections from the get-go. While they directly fought Ikko, the Quincy's and other Arankars supported them. Kenpachi in the meantime fought against Hikone while Shunsui was dealing with Tokinata. While clashing with Tokinata, Shunsui decided to confirm something. He asked if Tokinata had anything to do with the death of Nanao's mother. Tokinata responded by claiming that he had nothing to do with her death. Shunsui instantly accepted that Tokinata was telling the truth without a shred of doubt. At first, Tokinata was confused as to why Shunsui just accepted it right away, then realized that Shunsui invoked the game Pinky Promise, which causes anyone who tells a lie to first lose control of their fingers, then their arm if they lie again, and finally a third lie will cause them to lose their life. Since Tokinata's fingers were still gripping his sword, he was clearly being honest. Tokinata took advantage of his inability to lie by taunting Shunsui. He stated that he had suggested that Nanao should be arrested and tortured to see if she was in possession of the sword. This of course angered Shunsui, but not to the point where he rushed in blindly. So Shunsui tried to get more information out of Tokinata by asking him the name of his Zanpakuto. Tokinata merely brushed it off by stating that Shunsui had already investigated the sword, so he should already know its name. Shunsui was now sure that the name Kyuten Kyokoku was a fake. Shunsui figured that Tokinata was stealing his Zanpakuto's true ability with a fake name. What gave it away was the fact that the name was eerily similar to his Katen Kyokotsu. After realizing that there was no point in keeping it a secret anymore, Tokinata started releasing his sword Shikai. Shunsui attempted to stop it by rushing Tokinata. However, Tokinata stepped into the attack, making sure Shunsui missed his vitals. Then he released his Shikai with its true name, Enra Kyoten, which translated means the law of bewitching lucid mirror. Its sealed release Kyuten Kyokotsu meant 9 heavens mirror valley, so we see a relation to mirrors with the naming sense. With the fake release, the Zanpakuto's ability was reflecting attacks back at the opponent. You can see how that relates to mirrors with the reflection, right? Well, the true release had a different relation to mirrors. Or you see, in fighting games, if you pick the same character as your opponent, it was referred to as a mirror match. And that relates to Enra Kyoten because that Zanpakuto had the ability to mimic other Zanpakutos that it has seen. In other words, it mirrored their power. And with Tokinata having full control over the visual department, it wasn't hard for him to gather a vast collection of powerful abilities. Of course, Shunsui was not aware of this at first. He only figured it out when he saw Tokinata healing his own wounds, then attacking using these giant white balls with teeth, which was the Zanpakuto Gakaku Kaido, which belonged to Shunsui's old friend Kenpachi Kurayashiki, the 7th Kenpachi. It was then that Shunsui realized that Tokinata used Hanatoro Yamada's Shikai to heal himself. Tokinata began using a wide variety of abilities, but there was something off. They weren't exactly the same. Like he used Zenosuke's Kuromadani, the Afro Soul Reaper's ability, and summoned bigger pillars than the Afro Man did. However, when he used Genryusai Yamamoto's Ryujin Jaka, Shunsui stated that the flames were not as intense as the late Captain General's were. This proves that the Zanpakuto's power adjusted to match Tokinata's spiritual pressure. That was one of the drawbacks of Enra Kyoten. The other being that this Zanpakuto drains the wielder's life force, which made it so that none of the previous heads wanted to use it. So when Tokinata had Aura steal it, no one noticed it was missing. Back to the battle against Ikko, the Arankars were all ganging up on Ikko and had successfully backed him into a corner. Ikko mentioned that if he could just remember his true name, he could unlock his full power and easily defeat them. That's when Hikone showed up. Apparently their fight with Kenpachi was so evenly matched that they wanted to fight him at full strength, so Hikone sought out Ikko to take full control of it in its weakened state. Hikone called out its full Zanpakuto name. I'll try my best at pronouncing this. Ikko Miki Domoe Horaku Hakai. This caused Ikko to freak out, screaming, "No, that's not my name! "Don't suppress me!" Then Iko turned back into a sword, or maybe Hikone still had his sword, and he simply remerged with it. I don't remember the details that well, to be honest. Either way, he returned to the sword, and Hikone's outfit transformed into like a skeleton-esque armor. Hikone referred to this form as Iko's Bankai or Resurrection, since the sword was a hollow. They then went back to finish their fight with Kenpachi, so the Ironcars decided to leave Hikone up to Kenpachi, and went to aid in the battle against Tokinada. Now at this point, Tokinada had multiple Zanpakuto abilities active, so he could deal with all of the people attacking him. He had Gakaku Kaido, the 7th Kenpachi's ability, Ryujin Jaka, Zenbon Zakara, etc. Now all of these abilities were flying around the battlefield attacking everyone. Shunsui noticed that Tokinada was spreading these abilities out as wide as he could during this fight. That was when a thought occurred to him. Tokinada had control over the visual department, so he was able to gather these abilities by observing all of the fights that the Soul Reapers have had thus far. All of the fights. In that moment, Shunsui freaked out and yelled for everyone to close their eyes. In that same instance, all of the Zanpakuto shattered and turned to water and just fell to the ground. When the Quincy saw this, they were very confused and thought that the ability backfired. However, everyone else had this look of absolute fear and dread on their face. Shunsui gave the order for everyone to stay next to the person they are with, and if anyone, it doesn't matter who it is, if anyone tries to approach you, kill them with no hesitation. For those of you who have yet to realize, the Zanpakuto shattering and turning into water is Kyoka Soigetsu's Shikai release. Now, they were all under complete hypnosis and had to focus solely on defending. Tokinada spent the next few moments just toying with them. That is, until Hisagi jumped into the middle of the battlefield. This was the first time Hisagi and Tokinada had come face to face. At first, everyone thought this was an illusion because they were unaware that Hisagi was transported to the Kyogoku by Tessai. Tokinada decided to take advantage of the situation to piss off Hisagi by dissing Tosen and simultaneously revealing Aizen's reasoning for betraying the Gote 13. Shunsui tried to capitalize on this by attacking Tokinada while he was distracted with his taunting, only to be interrupted by Aura. Aura had wanted Hisagi to hear about Aizen and Tosen's motives in order for him to make an impartial choice on whether what they were doing was actually wrong. Tokinada then revealed the secret behind the Hogyoku and the Reo. This is when we learned that the Reo was a powerful individual who was born during the chaotic time before the worlds were separated. So Wako Mundo, the Soul Society, the world of the living, and possibly even hell were all on the same plane of existence. Then the founders of the 5 great noble clans came together to separate the worlds into different planes of existence. The head of the Shiba clan tried to recruit the Reo into helping them, while the head of the Tsunade Ishido clan didn't trust him, so he ambushed him and turned him into the enshrined corpse we see in the manga. As a result of his actions, the worlds were separated and the Reo's flesh were scattered around the worlds. Interestingly enough, the Reo let this happen. He did not resist, which made the other great nobles outside of the Shiba clan very suspicious of his motives. So they cut off both of his arms and dissected him until he was an empty vessel, used as the core to preserve the balance of the world. When Hisagi heard that the Soul King that ruled over the Soul Society was just a corpse, he was in utter disbelief, but he had his duty as a Soul Reaper to protect the Soul Society, and if the Reo was a linchpin keeping everything from falling apart, then so be it. Tokinada was disappointed with Hisagi's reaction and tried to use Kyoka Soigetsu, but Shunsui dragged Hisagi into a shadow before he could be hypnotized. There, they came up with a plan for Hisagi to fight with his eyes closed while sensing Tokinada's spiritual pressure. After leaving the shadows, Shuhei began attacking Tokinada with incredible speed and precision, the likes of which he's never used before. In the end, he managed to cut off Tokinada's arm, knocking him unconscious in the process. No one let their guards down though, fearing that this might be an illusion too. Then Aura rushed Hisagi and Shunsui called to warn him. Hisagi was confused because Aura's spiritual pressure was really far away, so he opened his eyes and a sword appeared in front of him and shattered into water. Then it was revealed that Tokinada had switched places with Aura and wore a spiritual pressure concealing cloak to prevent Shuhei from sensing him. And Aura had used her Reishi manipulation technique to make Hisagi think he was fighting Tokinada while she was somewhere else. Convinced that they had won, Tokinada resumed torturing them while using Ryujin Jaka to create a wall of flame, separating him and Aura from the rest of them. He then conversed with her about what happened between her and the Fullbringers. Aura knew that he saw everything through the visual department's spiritual bugs, which relay everything they see directly to Tokinada. He agreed that he saw everything, but he didn't know how they got control of Ginjo and the others. Then Yukio created a static gate and responded to Tokinada by stating he placed a virus in his past, so when Shukishima tried to insert himself into it, he got corrupted and attacked the others. Yukio was able to do this because Aura used her Reishi manipulation technique to increase his abilities. Regardless, Tokinada wanted to play things safe and placed the Fullbringers under complete hypnosis, but the Shikai wouldn't release. Then Ginjo attacked Tokinada, revealing that they weren't under Yukio's control. That was when Tokinada realized that Aura used her ability to create an extension of herself to touch all of the Zanpakuto around them, which negated Kyoka Soigetsu's release. Tokinada was surprised, not at the fact that Aura betrayed him, but at the fact that she didn't wait until he was weakened to do so. You see, Tokinada knew that Aura was going to betray him at some point. He was sure of it, because Aura was spending a lot of time with Hikone. Tokinada was sure that she developed some motherly affection for them, and would inevitably betray him to prevent Hikone from becoming the Soul King. It's just that Tokinada was expecting Aura to wait for an opportune moment where he would have been more vulnerable. At that moment, Aura started to feel weak, and fell to the ground unable to move or speak. Tokinada had used Yumichika's Ruiiro Kujaku to absorb Aura's spiritual pressure, but instead of using the vines, he simply started absorbing her energy through all of the Zanpakutos she was touching. He then tried to call for Hikone to come kill Aura because he thought it would be ironic to watch her get killed by the very person she was trying to protect. However, Ginjo wasn't going to allow it. He then rushed Tokinada while Giriko and Tsukishima dealt with the giant balls and flames. Ginjo even activated his Bankai to deal with Tokinada's barrage of attacks. Tokinada kept trying to release Koka Soigetsu, but Aura refused to let go, despite her spiritual energy being fatally low. In the end, Tokinada managed to put some distance between them and was about to call for Hikone before he suddenly had his arm lopped off. Next thing he knew, Kazeshini wrapped around his severed arm and flung it far away from him. Tokinada could not believe it. Somehow, Hisagi was able to attack him despite being under complete hypnosis, or so he thought. Turns out Shinji used his ability to change Hisagi's perception to see behind himself, so he never actually saw Kyoka Soigetsu's release. Now that Tokinada lost Enrei Kyoten, the Zanpakuto's ability disappeared. Then Sunsui and Shinji both remarked that if they were facing Aizen, that trick would have never worked because Aizen would have seen right through it, emphasizing the difference in intelligence between the two. Tokinada tried to run and get Enrei Kyoten, but Sunsui took it and hit it in Okyo like he did with Nanao Zanpakuto. Then Ginjo sliced open Tokinada's chest, but Tokinada still wasn't dead yet. He then pulled out a cloak that wrapped itself around him and disappeared. Tokinada had teleported himself to the engine room, where he tried to make the palace defense system activate to wipe out everyone below, but then Urahara appeared on the screen in front of him. Turns out Yukio and Urahara were exchanging a secret message during their previous battle, and Urahara allowed them to kidnap him. They then worked together to allow Kisuke to gain control of the palace and shut down all of the weapons on board. After being backed into a corner, Tokinada, in an act of desperation, activated a gate, which was opening up a portal to Karakura Town, and then he shut down the system, keeping the palace afloat. Tokinada had intended to drop the palace onto the city. In order to keep the others at bay, he used the palace's intercom to call for Hikone to come and kill them all, and he emphasized that they had to kill Aura because she betrayed him. Hikone then left her fight with Kenpachi and dashed straight towards Aura, but Hisagi got between them. Kenpachi arrived at the same time to continue his fight with Hikone, but Hisagi told Kenpachi to leave them to him. Madarame and Yumichika instantly freaked out because they know better than anyone to not get in Captain Kenpachi Zaraki's way when he's in the middle of a fight. Kenpachi asked Hisagi why he shouldn't just kill him right there and now. Hisagi responded by stating that Hikone was too weak for Kenpachi, and he's wasting his time fighting them, so he was going to take over. Kenpachi was confused at first, and then he started talking to someone. It was hinted that he was talking to Yachiru, who was most likely in her Zanpakuto form. So Kenpachi decided to step back for a bit, but if Hisagi does not put up a good fight, Kenpachi was going to kill him. Then Hisagi began his fight with Hikone, and Hikone cut him down with a single swing. Hikone then tried to walk away, but Hisagi got up like it was nothing. Everyone except Sunsui, Kenpachi, and Moguruma were completely shocked by this, and had even thought he was turned into a zombie by Bambi or Kurosuchi. The thing is, when Hisagi got sliced, he had entered his Zanpakuto's world and had a conversation with Kazeshini's spirit. The scene inside was that of a giant tree with a rusty windmill turning next to it. Hisagi was on top of the tree, and Kazeshini was in the shape of a black wind, forming the humanoid thing we saw in the Zanpakuto Rebellion arc. There they talked about why Hisagi challenged Hikone, and it was because Hisagi wanted to talk to Kazeshini, and this was the best way to do so. Kazeshini was confused as to why he went to such great lengths to converse with him. It was because Hisagi had just realized how he misunderstood Tosen, and also Kazeshini. Kazeshini thought that was a stupid reason to get cut in half for, but he was satisfied, and decided to help Hisagi out. Kazeshini has stated that he's not like White or Nozarashi, but he does have a special ability. Most of you should recognize Nozarashi being Kenpachi's Zanpakuto, but you may or may not have recognized White. I sure as hell didn't, so I looked it up, and apparently White is the name of the artificial hollow that attacked Ichigo's mother, and later became the White Ichigo or the True Sangetsu as we learned in the final arc. Kazeshini went on to explain that the shape of his Shikai that Hisagi hates so much is a reflection of Hisagi's inner desire to be the ideal Soul Reaper, so he took on the shape ideal for reaping. And since Hisagi put his ideals and life on the line, he fulfilled Kazeshini's requirement to fully unlock the capability of his Shikai and Bankai. To clarify, whenever Hisagi spoke to Kazeshini in the past, he would ask for flesh and blood. Hisagi would refuse because he didn't want to needlessly take any life. Now Hisagi had just offered up his own flesh and blood, allowing him to use Kazeshini's true power. Back to the fight, Hikone was repeatedly attacking Hisagi, with him constantly getting up like nothing ever happened. So Hikone was paying close attention to see how he was doing it, and when she cleaved him in half, she saw change emerge from his severed torso, pulling it back together and healing the wound. This was the true shape of Kazeshini. It wasn't the Reaper-shaped blades, but the chains themselves. It had allowed Hisagi to survive multiple life-threatening injuries in the past, but due to his desire to become an ideal Soul Reaper, which required him to be a killer, he couldn't use it to its fullest extent. Now that his goal is to save someone and not kill them, his Shikai changed to match his new goal. Hisagi then decided to show everyone his Bankai and toss the sights into the air. They then merged into this black wind covering the battlefield. Hikone then saw Hisagi covered in chains, one of which was attached to his neck and extending to connect to Hikone's body. They tried to remove it, but it was embedded deep inside of them, so they attacked Hisagi directly, only to repeat the same results as before. Only this time, whenever Hikone attacked Hisagi, a new chain attached itself to them. Hisagi had just stood there taking Hikone's blows without striking back, and in the end, Hikone was the one who started to get exhausted. Hikone became very confused as to why they were getting weaker without getting attacked. Then they noticed that the chain surrounding their body was going up to this dark orb in the sky. After taking a closer look, they noticed that the orb was compromised of chains. Hisagi then explained that the orb in the sky was compromised of both of their spiritual pressures, and the change is what links them together. Whenever one of them was hurt, the orb would absorb their spiritual pressure to heal the wound. Hikone tried to fire a Seto at it, but it was no use. The chains merely came back together and reformed the orb. This was Hisagi's Bankai, Kazusei Kojo in the Yen Press version, or Fushi no Kojo in the Japanese version, which translated means Undying Hangman's Noose. As the name implies, neither Hisagi nor his opponent can die in this state. They will only have their spiritual energy drained until they both collapse. However, when Hikone lost enough of her spiritual energy, Iko took full advantage of it and stole some of the rail fragments from inside of them and separated. He then regained the memory of his name along with his incredible power. But before he could do anything with it, Kenpachi activated no Zadashi and cut Iko in half, instantly killing him. So at this point, it really doesn't matter how strong his opponent is. Kenpachi Shikai could kill them with a single swing. So in the end, Hikone was out cold and Urahara managed to stop the palace from teleporting, but he was unable to stop it from falling and blowing up the Kyogoku. So Aura decided to use the remainder of her power to stop the palace from falling. Hisagi tried to help her, but she entrusted Hikone to him and vanished into thin air. Urahara then summoned a Gargantua for them to escape into, which the Arankars did not appreciate the fact that his Soul Reaper had the ability to summon a Gargantua that was as big as theirs, but they ignored it for the time being. After they left, the palace fell, destroying everything around it. As for Tokinara, he had managed to escape back to the Tsunayashido Manor, where he found Mayuri Kunosuji going through the Tsunayashido research data. He had no interest in Tokinara or what he had done. Mayuri just wanted to get his hands on the clan's research, and Tokinara was so distracted by Mayuri that he didn't notice someone sneak up behind him and stab him in the back. Turns out it was some little assassin girl whose family was used as sacrificial pieces for his massive plan. Tokinara could only laugh at this outcome. It wasn't Sunsui, Hisagi, or any Soul Reaper who had a grudge to pick with him, but an unknown assassin who wasn't even trained to not be swayed by their emotions who killed him. In the end, Tokinara died laughing, and Mayuri walked out of the room without a care in the world. Later, Tokinara's body was discovered, but his killer was never identified, so everything just went back to normal. Only now Kenpachi would chase after Hisagi and challenge him to a fight with his Bankai. That's how the rumor of Hisagi attaining a Bankai spread, which led to that comedic scene with Rangiko and Toshiro at the end of the manga. Hikone had lost most of her spiritual pressure when Iko stole some of the radio fragments from them, but they decided to train and regain their former skill. Hikone now lives on their own in the Rakangai, and Hisagi goes and checks on them from time to time. We also get to see what happened to Aura afterwards. She awoke in a desert area with Neliel waiting right beside her. Turns out Neliel went back to save her, but she was already dead, so she brought her Konbaku back instead. As a result of her being a powerful Fullbringer, she was able to come back as a Hollow. Now, it wasn't clear if she is a regular Hollow or an Arankar. I would like to believe she's an Arankar since she was a powerful Fullbringer with a part of the Rayo inside of her. For now, we know she's in Hueco with the other Arankars, and she does have a new goal: to be reunited with her daughter Hikone and hopefully feed her a tasty meal. We then get a quick flashback of Aizen and Tosen. Tosen had asked Aizen that if he ever started to forgive the Soul Reapers, could he destroy his Konbaku? He asked this because if he ever went back on his ideal and forgave the Soul Reapers, then all of the people he had killed would have died for nothing. He no longer would have been fighting for justice. It would have been needless slaughter for the sake of revenge. That was the fear that Tosen had been fighting with, the fear of betraying his ideals. Hisagi never had that fear because he sought to become the ideal Soul Reaper, which meant he had to be willing to take anyone's life, which Hisagi wasn't willing to. I mean, look at Byakuya for example. He's the prime example of an ideal Soul Reaper. He's willing to kill the people he loves for the sake of the Soul Society. Hisagi was not willing to go that far, so he gave up on becoming an ideal Soul Reaper and instead decided to be a Soul Reaper who will try to save as many people as he can. That's why Kazashini went from being a side-oriented to a chain-oriented ability. Now, not only could it heal Hisagi in his Shikai form, but even prevent his opponents from dying in its Bankai form. He now holds the fear of killing in his sword, so his sword changed to an ability to protect instead of one that reaps life. And that's going to be it for this one, folks. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the events of Camp Fear Your Own World. It was an awesome ride and really opens up the world of Bleach a little more, especially since it was written by the talented Ryogo Narita, who had apparently written Durara and Bakano. I didn't know that. I recently looked up his name to get images of him for the previous video, and Bakano and Durara came up, both of which were amazing animes that I highly recommend watching. Now, I didn't go over everything that had happened in the story. I mainly focused on key events that were developing a character or expanding on the lore of Bleach. One such example would be how I didn't mention Yuruichi's involvement throughout the story, like how Tokinara called a meeting between her and Byakuya. That scene didn't bring much to the table, but it's still an interesting scene that sort of allowed us to see how manipulative Tokinara can be. Anyways, I would like to once again thank you guys so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, and remember to keep having fun. See ya!